Welcome to the Goal Assist Football Business Masterclass. I'm Josh, and today's guest is someone with a wealth of experience leading clubs across the EFL. Steve Kavanagh has served as the CEO at Millwall, Charlton, Southend United, and sat on the board of the EFL as a non-exec director. He now continues his work in football as operating partner at Cookook Sport. We'll dive into leadership strategy and what it really takes to run a football club. Steve, it's great to have you with us. Welcome.
Thanks for that. Thanks for the brilliant piece. Probably unnecessary, but yeah, thank you. And yeah, hi.
Right. So let's get started on how did you break in? What was your sort of entry into the football industry? How did this all come about?
Yeah, I suppose I trained with BDO, qualified with BDO, spent over 10 years at BDO, left to go and make my fortunes in the city in the late 90s in the internet boom. That didn't last very long. And a recruitment agent contacted me and asked if I'd be interested in being finance director of a Premier League club, as Charlton were at the time. And I was fortunate enough to get through that process and get the role, working with an individual called Peter Varney, who was the CEO of Charlton at the time. And Pete and I worked together and he trained me really. We had various conversations. I originally saw it as a 5-year plan to put football on my CV, thinking that as a finance director, football in your CV would mean that you might get that interview that you might not get otherwise. And then once you're in the room, hopefully you can get there. But as that journey progressed, I always liked football, always played football, enjoyed football, and then it became apparent to Pete and to Peter around me that actually I could do more than just being a finance director, and he decided to and helped me train in the dark arts of what running a football club and all the other aspects of a club and what's entailed.
Right. So obviously your first sort of role within football was Charlton. Then is it talking about some of the specific nuances of what happened at the time? So one of the things that I saw is that you did a £2 million debt write-off and secured another £10 million investment. So let's talk about investment first. How does that come about? How, as a CEO of a football club, obviously cash is the most important thing on a day-to-day basis. Running a football club is very cash driven. If you can manage your cash flow, you can get quite far. So in terms of how did that come about in terms of securing that new investment into the club?
So, crikey, I'm going back in years here because I've been involved nearly 25 years now. Charlton was owned by a gentleman called Richard Murray, and then a group of investors around Richard, Martin Simons, David Sumners, Bob Whitehand, various other individuals that were there. Charlton actually during the Premier League years was always run to a very specific model, and cash wasn't required, which is, if you go to now, and it's quite unusual. Any operating profit was put back into the team and invested in the team. And Alan Kirbishley, as was the manager at the time, then bought players, and we acquired players like Darren Bent, Matt Holland, Paolo Di Canio. We had some good acquisitions that had come through the youth side. It was only when the club got relegated, and back in those days, and my numbers will probably be slightly wrong. I think Charlton, before we got relegated, turnover about 42 million, which if you look at now for a Premier League club isn't that much. And I think about 30 million of that was Premier League money. I believe the parachute was around 10 to 15 million. I can't remember the exact numbers. As I say, it's a long time ago now. And in relegation in those days, with the running costs of what the club ran at, we suddenly needed investment. So the actual current owners and some new investors came along. There were people they were connected to that came into that group, and we did a bond issue, wrote some debts off, and then did a bond issue to the new directors. And I think even to this day, I think that bond might even still be there within the mists of Charlton. I know they moan about certain things and the debt structures, so maybe somewhere deep in that I'm involved in that. But as I say, it was a long time ago. That what happened then, maybe it's more synonymous with a Championship League One club nowadays rather than the Premier League club. John Berylson used to say, who was the chairman of Millwall, He used to say, I'm a wealthy individual. No one ever knew how much he had. And he said, I used to compete against other wealthy individuals, and now compete against nation states.
Yeah.
And that's that from those days in Charlton back in the mid 2000s to now, the world of football has dramatically changed, with so much more money coming in from overseas and so much more investment coming from a wide variety of areas and places.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting. I think it comes on to the parachute issue is one of the big sort of debates in football at the moment, especially around the new independent regulator of how do they look at, how do they restructure, if they were to, the redistributions of funds across the pyramid. Because as we see the gaps continue to widen, the issue isn't going to get easier the longer this gets left in the current model. The parachute payments, I think, are they're a must for the clubs coming down because of the overheads that they have. I mean, without the 10 million you had at the time, that would have been an even bigger issue for Charlton. But the fact that there's such big gaps between each level of the pyramid, clubs going up and down, it will mean that football clubs will sort of almost be locked in position, because it means that going up becomes the gamble to go up becomes even more expensive. And then once you're up, you have to re-gamble to stay in that division. We look at, for say, like a Nottingham Forest at the moment. They've gone on to brilliant things, but without that initial gamble, they actually ended up breaching PSR because of the fact that they had to, in order to compete in the Premier League, they felt they needed to sign an entire new squad to have any chance of staying up. Whereas if you compare that to, say, like a Luton Town, who decided, you know what, we're going to try and be more sustainable, we're going to essentially bank the money, sort of hoping they'd stay up and sort of giving sort of credit to the players that got them there. But realistically, their chances of staying up were very narrow, and it's now cost them dearly, especially if you look at how they've performed again this season.
If you go back to Charlton in the late 90s and 2000, the model of Charlton was to go up, take the money, come down, and reinvest that money to go back up again. And that model was followed. Charlton ran that model, then got themselves established. West Brom did that model, got themselves established. Luton, in the current climate, have tried that model, and it hasn't worked. When you look at Charlton when they came down in what 2007-8, that period. They went down, didn't invest wisely, didn't use the parachute wisely, and then went down again. And many would argue the club's not really ever recovered from that period in time. But the numbers now have become so dramatically different that it's complex. And parachutes, to me, if there was an easy answer, it would be done. There is no easy answer. When Charlton went down, in that first year, had we not sold Darren Bent to Tottenham, we couldn't have paid the wages at the end of June. That's how bad it was. And the parachute actually only helped through that. It was a sale of players that made that essential. But the numbers at that time, we're talking 10, 15 million pound parachutes. We're now talking what, 40, 50, 60 million pounds? That's a dramatic change when you've got clubs in the Championship whose turnovers are 20, 25 million. So 2-3 times their turnover is what that club gets as a parachute. Never mind player sales or anything else. And those dynamics have dramatically altered what's happening. We saw, we're recording this now, but we saw yesterday Leeds and Burnley gone back up. And if you went and looked at the odds, chances are that Sheffield United are odds-on favourites to go up as well. And that's the same three teams going up, and look, the same three teams coming down. You're just getting a yo-yo, which over the long term cannot be good for football, cannot be good for the Premier League. But we got ourselves into this place which is really difficult to unravel, because as the income levels have grown, you know what the Premier League want? They want people to go up and invest and to make the Premier League competitive. Understand that. Then when you come down, what is that parachute spent on and how is it used? And the advantage it gives to that club now, because of the financial gap between the two, means that 99 times, well, nine times out of 10, the same team is going to go back up, certainly within that 2 year period of the parachutes.
Yeah, and you've seen that as well. Not only the spend, but also when you speak to clubs like, say, Stoke. So Stoke obviously are very wealthy owners in Bet365.
Yeah.
But obviously under profitability and sustainability rules, they're not able to just throw everything at it because it's a case of managing your losses. So I think there's a bigger issue around not just the financial sustainability of how sort of funding and distribution works, but how that in turn with the financial regulations ensures that we still get a competitive sort of pyramid and not just individual leagues, because everybody loves the story of the club that climbed through the pyramid. I mean, the fact that Brentford and Brighton are doing so well now, everyone sort of got back sort of behind that story because they've come from lower divisions and managed to go up. They spent a lot of money on the way. People sort of glorify the sort of what they've done, and they've done a brilliant job, but it obviously also cost a lot of money. It didn't just happen all sustainably and magically. They took risks on along the way, and they managed to pull it off. Do you feel like the way in which the industry is going, we'll see less and less of that then?
I think we're seeing less and less of it now, and since my time in the Premier League back in the early 2000s to now, the number of clubs that are moving between the leagues and coming up and through, they are getting less. It's quite clear. A Charlton coming through, Luton got up, but Luton got in. When you look at the Championship now this season, there'll be, because of Luton down towards the other end, there will be 3 clubs in those playoffs that could be that one that's come through that goes up. Now that's that you're in the playoffs. You're in roll of a dice, and you're in luck. Luton got that. They got lucky. They managed to get through the playoffs. I think Sunderland got beat that year in the semi-finals, and Middlesbrough. But it is happening less and less. But yeah, what a club through the playoffs could come up. That's come up through the pyramid. I think the top 2 is almost virtually guaranteed now to be a parachute club, and that is a concern. But as I said, there aren't easy answers, because we've sleepwalked into this. We've walked into those numbers in the Premier League growing to such a level, and the differential with the Championship growing to such a high amount, that now finding an answer, it's social. If there was an answer, it would have been done, and we probably wouldn't be looking at an independent financial regulator. But there isn't an easy answer, because if you're in the Premier League, you're not going to be a turkey and vote for Christmas, are you? Why would you? Why would any sane business person do that? So everyone can understand everyone else's arguments, but what someone can't do is find that middle ground that is fair and reasonable to all, and brings us back to a world where actually that transition through the leagues, that ambition to go through from National League right the way through, can be there, because that's what football was always founded on.
No, I couldn't agree more. And the issue is within the football industry, and trying to sort of get to a point where we can find a middle ground, is the fact that there's so many different stakeholders. So like we found it, obviously, whilst I was at the EFL, we managed to get salary cap for, rather than SCMP. Obviously, it was SCMP. Then we went to salary cap for League One and League Two. Then we ended up going back to SCMP. The reason why that is because, so firstly, you have to draft up all these new regulations. You put it to the football clubs. Hopefully, they vote it through. And again, like you say, why would turkeys vote for Christmas? We had that with sort of owners and directors test, in the case of why would we vote for regulations that make it more difficult to sell this asset in the future? Like it makes no sense. So it's the same with it. So even you get to a position where, great, we can agree on this, we've got a salary cap, great. But then the PFA and the players go, hang on, we don't want to be kept on our salaries, goes through, and it ends up being cancelled. So the whole sort of ecosystem sport, there's so many knock-on effects to try and find this middle ground, this sort of like mythical middle ground, I almost think doesn't exist. I feel like there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers whenever there's change, and making sure that the losers aren't losing as hard as they currently are almost is almost what we're trying to strive towards.
Yeah, wherever we get to, I think you end up with both sides being unhappy. But that's going to be an unhappy necessary place that where we're going to have to be. it's interesting when you listen to, I think Paul Barber's doing a lot of speaking around the independent financial regulator at the moment, and Paul and I have spoken many times. And Paul talks about, well, if we put money down into the championship, what are they going to spend it on? Where,
Yeah.
what they're just going to spend it on player wages. But actually, okay, well, let's look at the parachute clubs. What do they spend it on? They spend it on rocket fuel to get themselves back promoted. So maybe there needs to be a conversation about how that transitional money is spent. But then, as we've seen with rules over the years, everyone will try and beat the rules.
Yeah.
We've seen it with, you go back in time, you had Derby and then Middlesbrough and Wycombe suing Derby over breach of the rules. You've got it now with the Premier League and threats of, if Man City get found guilty on the 115 points, clubs are going to sue. It's probably a good time to work for a law firm like Gunnar Cook Sport, really, I suppose.
Yeah.
There isn't simple answers, because football has become something much bigger than our national game.
Yeah, it's really interesting times, like you say. But for myself, obviously, when I went in at the EFL to obviously enforce the financial regulations, it was obviously a significant role, but it was almost niche. And then when everything kicked off with the European Super League final review, all of a sudden this sort of niche position was, obviously I was initially based within the finance department, and then we built a club financial reporting unit, so like a wider team to be enforcing these. This area of sort of football finance, sustainability, law, because of all the back end of it, is only going to continue to grow as these issues continue.
We started this conversation with investment. How do you get investment into clubs? The losses that clubs in the Championship are running at the levels, is that a loss, or actually is that investment to try and equalise things and to give themselves a chance of getting there? Every year in the Championship, there is a group of clubs who want to be able to invest in, and Stoke have the financial resources. They are sustainable, and you then get into what is the definition of sustainable. They and a group of clubs will want to invest, and the owners will want to spend money. And then you've got the group of clubs that are saying, well, hold on a sec, if we do that, that could put us in financial difficulties. And if you all start spending, we're going to have to spend, because there's a tag and drag effect.
Yeah.
And you end up in this situation of, well, should you invest or shouldn't? And then each year, the dynamics of the numbers of clubs change, because you need 16 clubs in the Championship to get a vote through. And then you go from, and the year you're talking about in terms of salary caps, the Championship worked really, really hard on trying to get a salary cap through as well. And I don't understand the background to it at that time. It should have gone through the PFNCC. And if I got the PFNCC wrong, I apologise. But it should have gone through that committee that had the PFA on it. And had that happened, I think at the time we had the votes to get a salary cap through in the Championship. Whether it sustained itself as you move down the road, I don't know. But the problem is, and I sat in the EFL boardroom as it was at Blandford Street once, and we sat there, and literally the two groups, we had one group at one end of the table and the other group at the other end of the table, and it was like a game of ping pong. We would ping the point would just go back and forth across the table. And interestingly, Brentford were in the camp of, we need to control costs. And I think Brentford, actually, within reason, they put it more into the recruitment and the way they recruited, and intelligently went that direction, rather than trying to spend a lot of money. But I do think they spent a lot of money as well. So investment is really key, and you end up in this scenario of clubs clambering because they want to be competitive. They don't want to be struggling, and if they've got the resources to be that, then you understand that. But then there's the counter argument of, when that owner suddenly then says, actually, I can't get promoted, I've spent 3 years blowing my brains out, you end up in a scenario, something like a Reading or a Derby. Mel Morris still had money, but I think Mel just said, I can't. His family probably said, you can't keep spending at these levels, and then you stop, and then that community asset becomes at risk. So there is even in the Championship, there are rights. Everyone's got a right of opinion, and everyone actually has a good opinion. It's just there are different opinions on how to do it and what should be done.
Yeah, I think it sort of, obviously I can't go into too much on Derby because obviously I direct work on it. But in terms of that whole thing with Derby was such a shame. So like that day, because basically we knew that Derby or Aston Villa, one of those football clubs, whoever loses that game is in real big trouble. And it was almost like this should be a day of like sort of celebration because a football club's going to the Premier League, they've got their chance. But from someone who was looking at the numbers, we knew one of those football clubs is going to be in very big trouble after that final whistle is blown. And it's really awful. I mean, obviously, you've had experience working at Southend United, which, again, is a football club that has gone through its issues, especially in recent times, to put it there. Yeah.
Well chosen, the words there.
Yeah. What can you sort of reflect on your time at the club and sort of what lessons were sort of learnt during that whole period?
Oh, crikey. I mean, Southend, I went there, we were in League Two. First year we got to the Johnstone's Paint Trophy final, then we got to the player semi-final, then we got to the player final and won it. We won it on penalties, having equalised in the 122nd minute against Wycombe. And what I'm a critic of Ron Martin. But Ron within reason let us run the club, and he allowed the manager to invest to a level because he wanted the club to be successful. He wanted to get a new ground, and he could see that by the club being successful, it meant the club, the asset value increased, and the chances of him developing the ground and building Southend United into something bigger than what it was were greater. The problem for Ron is, of course, that his businesses outside of football didn't necessarily sustain the stable cash flows that he needed to run a football club. So you went through periods where people weren't getting paid, and that's just completely unacceptable. But his heart was always in the right place. But actually, he couldn't support it with his activities off the field to maintain that level of investment. What happened after I left is for others to talk about, and I can't comment on that. But we actually went through a period where we were successful and got into League One. The year I left Southend, had Millwall not scored in the last minute of the last game of the season, Southend were in the playoffs and not Millwall. Millwall went to the playoff final, won it in the last minute. Southend ended up in the National League, and why? Probably a whole book can be written on that. But you have owners that are investing monies into their clubs, and they're investing, at I'm going to say reasonable levels, but to the man on the street, £1 million, £2 million a year isn't a reasonable level, right, to throw into your local football club. But they're investing at those levels, and they were the levels that Ron would be investing at, and then something happens in those people's businesses outside of football that means they haven't got that £1 million to invest. And they're normally local businessmen at that level. And is it fair that the club's penalised because of what's happened to the owner? But the owner's overspending and investing at a level he couldn't sustain. Again, I could argue it from every which way, if I'm honest. And it was Southend's a great club. It's a great club. But clubs at that level, with Southend attracting 8,000-9,000 fans in the National League, they need to be higher than that. But it needs investment to get them there, and it needs people that can see that. But not risking the very future of the club if that investment isn't sustainable for them.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a business case around the shift of financial models at football club, trying to shift them because there's risk. Whatever way you fund your football club, there's risk. I've seen where clubs were like, the way in which we're going to be compliant is we're going to sell this player in January, or we're going to be selling them at the end of the season, and we're going to get X amount. But and you're like, there's risk because a player trader model. A lot of people like the idea of buying a young kid, develop him for 3 years, sell him on for a profit, reuse that money into the football club, the player trader model. The issue is with that, it's one injury or one off-field scandal or one whatever. There's a lot of risk when you're relying the financial stability of your football club on essentially one person. And we've also seen cases of it's not even. We've had it where this, because a player went on for a high fee and then went on for an even bigger fee at another club, they're actually relying on the sell-on fee for the help of that. And it's just like you're relying on one player going from one club to another club that has nothing to do with you for the sell-on fee to help you be compliant. It's
trading models are essential underneath that, and I've had some owners that wouldn't sell players and didn't want to sell a player because he wanted that player to go on his pitch and to be his star, and but actually selling players at the right time is a key part of running a club, and it has to be a mix of all of those different models. It can't just be one and it can't just be the other. And you have to sell players. You have to be able to trade players through, and you have to have the recruitment set up and the organisation to enable you to bring the next player in and to develop the next one. So there's not reliant on one. Hopefully you got two or three. But also you have to remember everyone's trying to do the same. It's competitive. So you can't all be successful. And as we've seen now, the Premier League, they tend to go and fish in Europe, not in the Championship.
No, I mean absolutely, and it's the same with even the EFL clubs domestically. A lot of signings are coming from abroad. There's not much Championship aren't really looking at League One as much. League One and League Two, there's a closer relationship, but the financial gap between the two is a lot closer. So, the standard of football is closer, whereas the standard between the Championship and League One is now growing, and the standard between the Championship and the Premier League is now massively growing. So they can't look down the English pyramid or at domestic talent because of the gaps.
It is that also because clubs are now more reliant on a trading model and trying to push a trading model more. Therefore, they have to attain those values to support their model, and therefore, actually, they're asking too much. Hence, clubs start then looking overseas and saying there's better value in the Dutch market or the French second division, or is it just because Brentford and Brighton have been so good at using data and identifying those talents and then bringing those players in that everyone thinks they should then begin doing that, or is it just a combination of the two? There is value, but sometimes I think the Championship could be accused of that by the Premier League, but the Championship will also accuse League One and League Two of doing the same, of overpricing those players. And so we end up in a situation of that.
Apologies for taking you away from the podcast, but this will be really quick. We've launched our football business community. What that is everyone that's a guest on this podcast is part of this community. So if you would like to network with our guests, this is the place to do so. We have a live Q&A with every podcast guest on, so you can ask your questions rather than just listening to mine. If it's something that sounds interesting to you, there's a discount code in the description below. Use it, click the link, join the community, and then I'd love to see you on our next live Q&A so you can network with myself and Steve. Right, that's all from me. Let's get back to the podcast. You obviously, so Charlton, Southend, then you end up at Millwall. So tell us a bit more about that and how that opportunity came about. What lessons did you what made that?
You're not asking me to dob someone for tapping someone up, are you?
Nah. What made that the right move for you? What made you go, yes, this is a good opportunity for me. I'd like to sort of be involved with Millwall as a football club.
Andy Amber was the CEO of Millwall at the time, and Andy said, look, I may be moving on. If you're interested, I think there might be an opportunity to have an interview in that role. So I'm going to word that very carefully around the rules. And I met John Berylson, and John as an individual. Anyone that has come across John and worked with John was an incredible individual. Andy had enormous respect for him, and Andy's a good guy. I trusted in Andy, and look, Southend could go so far. It was financially challenged. You would go through, when I first went to Southend, and one of the reasons I probably ended up at Millwall, when I first went to Southend, in Southend's dressing room, I have Freddie Eastwood that played in, I think Freddie certainly went to Wolves for a lot of money. Had Neil Harris. We had some really good players in that dressing room, and I got to know Neil when I first went there, and the manager was Paul Sturrock. I mean, Paul's a fantastic football legend, really. and the players weren't getting paid. And Paul left. There's a whole story about Paul leaving and what happened with Phil Brown coming in. We won't go into. Haven't got enough time for that. Um, and when Phil came in, he wouldn't accept the players not getting paid, but the owner still didn't have the funding really to support the business. So the players aren't getting paid. The players are now getting paid. Who doesn't get paid? It's the staff. And I always took the view that I'm chief executive. If the money's not in the bank account, then I'm last to get paid. Although I did have a row with Ron once when perhaps maybe some money went in his direction rather than mine, which wasn't a good one. And we were living hand to mouth, and we were being successful, and we were getting the club, but it could only go so far. And in those environments, and Ron wasn't prepared to sell the club. And there's an infamous video during COVID where he talks to some of the fans, and one of the fans offers to buy it off of him, and he tells him quite straight he wouldn't sell it, and I know he has now. So the club at that time, back in 2016, there was only so far it could get, and you were punching above your weight, and financially, really, to get any further, it was difficult. And the opportunity to work with John and Millwall and with a club that had the infrastructure and the support networks to go much higher was too good an opportunity, and I'm glad I took it, because John Barrett, I mean, I worked for 8 years with John, and John was an incredible individual, and we got promoted in the first year in the player final, and we then managed to sustain, through John's and the family support and investment into that club, we sustained that club in the championship, and every single year we used to measure it pounds per point. Whilst there was a lot of money had to go in to sustain you in the championship, our wage bill was always certainly bottom half, if not, bottom quartile. And every year we would outpunch that weight, every year. And even I think in the last year, when we had different struggles, we outpunched our pounds per point achieved in the league, and that was a measure that we used to try and attain. That there's an argument of, if John had put a load more money in one go, could he had one go and got up, but then you risk the owner then walking away when it doesn't work, as we've seen with other worlds. But it was one of the best decisions I've ever made, and I'll never regret going to Millwall, because working with John was a life-changing event, and it was a pleasure to have known him, and devastating that he died in a car crash.
Yeah, it's a shock, isn't it, when, especially the way in which everything happened. But you had great times at the club, and it shows, sort of football is more than, it almost feels more than other roles, because of it feels more of a family than sort of just a job, which is obviously we could tell by how passionate you were speaking about it. When you were talking also about sort of pounds per point is like sort of a key metric that you'd sort of measure your performance on. If you were going to be advising football clubs on what are our best ways to sort of monitor our sort of what should our KPIs be as a football club? How should we be measuring performance, other than obviously just league points, pounds per points, as you just mentioned? What are the sort of key measurements that you think football clubs should be monitoring to make sure that they're making sort of progression in the sort of the right direction?
As you identified early on here, every club is different in what they are and what they want to be, and the most important thing in that is actually sitting down with the owner and trying to understand what they want, which isn't always easy, by the way, and understanding what their metrics are and where they want to get to. Now, the start of the season, every owner is going to say, well, I want to get promoted, and if you don't want to get promoted at the start of the season, you have to question your rationale and reason of why you're involved in a competitive sport. And a sport that has jeopardy in the other direction as well. Pounds spent per point is a good, it's one good measure. But you could look at sales of players and the achieving values. If we're looking at a trading model, and it's purely about a trading model, then actually the return on investment into your academies, your return on investment in terms of what you've spent on buying players to what you're selling players. There are many different ways of looking at that. I think, to me, first and foremost, you have to run a club as a business. You can't just go, we're losing money, so that's fine, we can carry on hemorrhaging money. You need to make sure that everything you do is has a business case, is a rationale, and you're doing it for the right reason, even if that's investment, which may translate on the book, accounts, and I'm an accountant, it may turn into a loss on the balance sheet, but actually that loss is designed as an investment. So academies can cost 2, 3, 4 million pounds, but actually that investment and takes a long time. You then get one player that comes through and goes for 10, 12 million pounds. Actually, was that investment the right thing to do? So there are the metrics you can look at differ as you go across the club. Certain clubs, it can be your attendances and your season ticket sales and how you drive that. Season ticket models. Bradford have always run a very, very low season ticket price because they pack out a stadium. Other clubs are driving the prices of season tickets up. So what's the right metric? Is it your attendances? In my last year at Millwall, we had the highest attendance for 70 years. Some people would argue, well, the prices were too low, but actually it was never about the price per ticket. It was about maximising the income the club gets and how you maximise that income. And that could mean lower ticket prices, depending on the capacity. So there are so many different metrics as you go across that business that it's important to identify with your owner what's important to them and then start building the models around to deliver that.
No, I think it's that's really key. Obviously, treating each football club and understanding the individual challenges and their individual objectives. I think something that you touched on, ticketing pricing, there is quite interesting because you also see you're not only obviously you're competing in your league as a football club, but there are distinct advantages and disadvantages also based on the geographically location. So you see sort of the London clubs are able to generate far more and sort of ticket pricing and all the rest of it based on the affluence of the area in which the football club just happens to be located in. Whereas if you're from a less affluent area, you're never going to be able to compete with the season. You're never going to be able to compete with the season ticket prices of a London club. And how?
Yeah, I think that goes two ways there, right? Because if you're Norwich and you're one town, one club, then your abilities in that town, where else are you going? You're not going to pop down the road to Ipswich, are you? Whereas in London, there is a lot of choice in London. So how do you maximize your revenues is your challenge. Every year, and I did this at Southend because Southend is technically one club, one city. It's a city now following the sad death of David Amiss, the MP. But Southend had a lot of West Ham, Arsenal, Tottenham fans. We used to have there was a Tottenham shop on the high street. So I used to go and hand out free tickets on a match day morning outside anyone coming out of the Tottenham shop. So it was that was quite funny. When you look at that, so it's not always about. Every year I'd have this argument with boards saying, if you put the prices up by 5%, that doesn't mean your income goes up by 5%. Because actually, by putting the prices up by 5%, and I always used to do the number, if you lost 100 season ticket holders, your income has now gone down, not up. And in fact, if you dropped it by 5% and your numbers went up by 100, you're better. So there was never a linear position between the price of a ticket and your income. It was much more complicated than that, and it was about the numbers and how much spare capacity you had within that stadium, and also how much capacity you wanted to leave for match-to-match tickets. And in London, the one thing you do get is tourism and the ability to get fans who are coming in for a day trip. The Millwall fans used to go nuts about day trippers, but it was a bit of wasn't fair. But there were a lot of foreigners that would come into London and come to a game because they could get a ticket, and we utilise that market because it's about income. And every pound that those people are putting in is a pound the owner hasn't got to put in, and or a pound that the other hardcore season ticket holders haven't got to bring up and put forward because someone else is helping subsidise what are substantial losses.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that especially when it comes to sort of price elasticity, you have to look at the impact on season ticket holders, and that's where sort of transparency and communication with the fans, like why are you or why aren't you attending the games, is an interesting concept. Is it because I'm just simply priced out now and I can't attend? If it was £5 cheaper, £10 cheaper a ticket, whatever, I'd be there every week. Having access to that information, understanding that, and I think, people, there's been a push now. Obviously, the EFL have moved from sort of trust to now they're rebranding it as EFL in the community, and sort of like trying to build the connection between trusts and football clubs far closer together, because they're, as you say, like club by club, everything's different, and there's some clubs that work really closely with their trusts, and there's others that, well, I've seen clubs that charge the trust money to have access to the brand of the football club. So there's some relationships that are far different to others. And what are your general thoughts on sort of the community aspect of football? Where do you think sort of clubs' responsibilities lie in sort of the wider sense of football?
So my view of I came into football at Charlton Athletic. Charlton ran an unbelievable trust, and Jason Morgan was a CEO then, and he still is a CEO now. And it's been an unbelievable trust that has shown the way in for many clubs, and how it can utilise the power of the badge and the power of the club and the power of the football to change lives in a positive way. And when back in the Premier League days, we're paying Paolo Di Canio what seemed at that time a hell of a lot of money. Actually, now it's less than the Championship players on. You've got players like Paolo Di Canio, you're paying them a lot of money, and it feels a bit obscene, a bit dirty, really, because they're on all this money. But what made you feel really good about the world was actually the work the community trust did and how you're changing people's lives. And then over the South End, it's fair to say that Ron viewed the trust in a slightly different way. I tried to change that, and I work closely with the trust, because I'm a big believer in the club and the trust being closely linked. Because as a club, if you are a community club asset, your fans come from your local community. Now, you can define your local community in many ways. So if you're delivering good and helping those people in that community, and you're going into the schools and talking to the young children about your club and what you can do and why you should healthy eat because the players eat this way, and then that child gets the opportunity to come to a game, well, they probably then get the badge in their heart. So why wouldn't you do that? Why would you not engage? Why would you not actively want that? And in fact, why would you not see that as a phenomenal opportunity to market to your community by selling actually the things that you can do positively for them in their communities, bringing in money that doesn't exist, that the councils can't do anymore. This world where clubs and their community trust are pulled apart, I don't understand it. I don't understand why you would start charging your community trust loads of money to use your badge. They're using your badge to go and promote your badge. It's the best marketing spend you could ever spend. Giving them some tickets and use of your badge for free is the best spend ever. I fail to understand why a club would not really actively engage with its community. I don't agree with giving them loads of money, and they have to go and work for what they do. You give them support in ways and access to things that they can't get, but it helps them promote what they're doing, and it helps you promote your club. It's win-win. I don't understand why anyone would not really strongly engage with their community trust. And if anyone has got a break on either side and wants to come and talk to me about it, come and talk to me, because I actively strongly understand. As at Millwall, we went and got a planning application based on our community trust work out in Sevenoaks. Now that's phenomenal. It was great for the community trust because they got access to a whole new area. It was great for the club because they got a planning application. That's a club and its community working hand in glove, delivering benefits for everybody.
No, brilliant. I couldn't agree more. I think the issue is when clubs see tough times, or they struggle financially, the first thing they look to cut, unfortunately, a lot of the times happens to be the trust. And it's the hard work and the cutting of the trust is one of the hardest things. to see football clubs do. And you see it with academies or women's football. Like these tend to be the areas that get cut before anything else. And it's just a shame that's sort of the way a lot of football clubs end up going.
But intuitively, if you actually look to your community trust, when you're in a tough time, that's when you need them more. You don't want to be cutting it. You need to get out to your community more. You need your community to come through the gates, even in the tough times, to support the team, to support you, and support what's going on. And if there's a reason why they're doing that, because people are delivering great courses for their kids, etc., then cutting that, madness.
No, I couldn't agree more. So just to sort of wrap up, obviously you're now working as operational director. Have I got that right?
I suppose technically I'm an operating partner for Gunnar Cook Sport. I head up Gunnar Cook Sport. Gunnar Cook's a large law firm, and Daryl Cook talked to me about creating Gunnar Cook Sport as a division of Gunnar Cook. So in some ways it's a startup business offering consultancy advice and services, and ranging from private family investment houses who want to get into buying a club and understanding that process and helping them through that process, to providing some support to your CEO, because your CEO, as I know, your plate's full, and then you will get a phone call. You don't know when that call's coming. You don't know what's on that call, but it's normally a disaster. And then you've got to find the capacity to deal with that. And actually having a spare pair of hands to come in and help and support at those times, someone that's been around the block, is an area that I think we can provide really, really well. So it's a wide range. And even going into, we've got a massive crypto is a dirty word in many people's eyes. So Rare went really badly wrong. It's seen as gambling, but actually the Web3 technology and what's happening in crypto is a really interesting world. And if you watched Arsenal v Real Madrid the other day, crypto.com was around the advertising boards all the way. Kraken's on the sleeve of Tottenham. Crypto is sneaking back in there as a sponsorship brand. We've got a phenomenal crypto team, and actually trying to work out how clubs can utilize the developing technologies of Web3, which just happens to support crypto, and actually come into that market in a safe way and understand the FCA regulations and what goes on. There's a whole world there which we can help on. So it's a really broad range of services. It's a startup consultancy, but it's built within inside of a very grown up business in Gunnar Cook LLP.
No, it's brilliant, and I'm sure many football clubs can benefit from the advice and experience you have to offer them, and especially with the sort of the Web3 space. Like you say, I think a lot of people have got the sort of scared of the crypto and what's happened. But when any new emerging technology comes to play, there's always people that abuse it, and there's always it's like when a credit card was the first thing, everyone was petrified that their money, it isn't real money, it's just a card, like we're going to get scammed. And there are people that scam people still today on credit cards and debit cards, but overall the underlying technology of what a debit card is a positive net use for the people that use it on a daily.
Cashless in a stadium, right? Everyone, Millwall, you can't go cashless at Millwall. There you can. And actually the world has gone there. If you went back before COVID, there was no way that Millwall would have gone cashless. Now it's a cashless stadium, and rightly so, because the world has moved on.
Brilliant. I think that's a great place to finish. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you. For those who are interested, we also, as part of this podcast, we don't just want you to watch and engage. We actually want you to ask your own questions, be part of the conversation, network with our guests. There'll be a link in the description below if it's something that you might be interested. Thanks,
George.
Thank you.